If you love Filipino food and if you love comfort food, Lugaw, Goto, Arroz Caldo, these are probably all at the top of your list. So today we're gonna go to my favorite Lugaw spot in all of Metro Manila. Then we're gonna go back to the studio and I'm gonna show you 3 different ways you can cook this much loved dish. Since we are revisiting a place we went to before, which is something we've actually never done, but we had a workshop with Howie Severino and he told us since we have archival footage of a lot of these places that we shot maybe 6-7 years ago, it'd be cool to kind of go back and see, you know, what the update is, how the owners have evolved and everything. So that's what we're gonna be doing today. I'm gonna be going back to one of my favorite Lugaw spots in all of Metro Manila, and that's Lugawan sa Tejeros. So we posted this video 5 years ago and it was all about Lugaw around Metro Manila. Modern. It had this amazing almost ramen counter-like experience, which I love seeing, and people would line up behind each other to take the next spot. The Lugaw plain here was 15 pesos, Goto plain was 25 pesos. That's 5 years ago. I don't know how much the prices have changed. I also don't know how the place has evolved. Okay, so this is the original spot.
Yes, this is the original. This is where we started.
I actually don't recognize it at all.
Really?
Yeah. So how can you kind of tell me about maybe the beginning? Because when we came here, this was at a time when
we are recognized as Carinderia type.
Yes, and we never told anyone where we would go, so we would just show up.
We were all surprised that we were not here.
So we weren't able to meet you. So how did this all start?
So it actually started, there's actually 2 Lugawan sa Tejeros. Lugawan.
Okay.
Basically, this place is known for Lugawan.
So this is Tejeros Street.
Here. No, this is the Barangay Tejeros.
Ah, Barangay
this
Tejeros.
This is Malolos. This is the Pasong Tamo.
So both of them were called Lugawan sa Tejeros.
This one is Lugawan sa Tejeros and that one is Lugawan sa Pasong Tamo.
Ah, okay.
So they are actually known compared to us. Yeah.
Ah, so they were more famous before you guys.
More famous compared to us.
Okay.
But eventually, actually, it all started when the original owner decided to stop the business.
Okay.
And apparently,
this
luckily,
was the original owner of this place.
Yeah, the original.
Ah, so it was here already.
Yeah.
Okay.
He actually converted it to a storage.
So this was the original spot.
Yes, the original spot. So basically, there are we have our fryer here and the Lugaw are here. So the customer will just order, ask for the variant of Lugaw, then we'll serve it.
It's so much smaller than what I remember. So how did you go from 200 bowls a day to 2,400 bowls a day?
Probably when we introduced the lechon kawali on top as our toppings. Okay. That's one of our breakthrough, and as well when you posted your video.
Yeah.
And because probably it's more of your reaction. It's so genuine when you said that clear winner, guys. Go to Lugawan sa Tejeros. And that's actually our breakthrough.
It was really, really good. Yeah. So when did the decision to say, okay, let's take over Lugawan sa Pasong Tamo?
Okay, because that time, I remember it all total blackout in Metro Manila.
Okay.
And there was one incident that they have a lot of people and we don't have. And apart all their what do you call that? Other people that were waiting for their queue transferred to us.
Okay.
And the word of mouth started. The following day, a lot of people are already coming in.
So they were kind of comparing. Okay.
Yeah,
and then these guys decided to close eventually, or
yeah, eventually, and it's actually closed for I think 3 months. And my tita and I was standing there and saying, if that's still open for lease next year, we will rent that out.
Nice.
That's our plan.
Okay, so let's go have a look at the new place now.
Okay.
So this is the new spot.
Yes. When we opened this one, we added Arroz Caldo.
So this has, wow, it's almost a 10-year business. So what have you learned over those 10 years?
It's no longer a business just for us. It's with our people already. Yeah. So if you will, we have people who stay with us for this long, 8 years, who still looking after our business. So basically, we don't call them as our employee. We call them as our business partner.
Amazing.
So we don't, because the business is going through even without our presence in the store.
Yeah.
So that's actually our
which is, I mean, the only way to run a successful scale business is to have a really strong team behind it.
Yeah.
And if you had to be in the kitchen all the time, then
we will not grow.
Yeah, exactly. Perfect. All right, I'm excited to eat now. Those are the type of stories I love to hear. It's always great to revisit places that we've been to in the past and see kind of how they've evolved and how they've changed and how they've really successfully grown their business, which I think is an absolute story and a testament to the quality of their food and how they've built a community over the years throughout their food that they make, which is always fantastic. So I've never tried the patas before here, so I'm gonna try the patas first. I mean, the amount of fat in there looks amazing. I mean, this is not supposed to be a patas review, but that is solid. On the sweeter and soupier side, which is not a bad thing. The noodles are perfectly cooked, but those chunks of beef are so nice. But next, the reason why we're here. Always a little bit of calamansi for me. So we saw how they made it, which kind of gives me an idea on how to kind of change up my recipes a little bit. So this is their most popular L4 with a crispy kawali on top of it. Just as solid as I remember. The mark for me of a good lugaw is really kind of like the consistency of the rice in the soup. You want it to be gluey but not too clumpy or kind of like constricted. And that kind of helps you put all the ingredients on top and make sure that they can sit kind of perfectly on top of the bowl, which is what you want because this dish is only made better once you have a lot of toppings on it, right? And I love how she mentioned they use the same lugaw base, which is a beef broth, which completely shocked me. And then all the added ingredients make it a different dish. And I think when talking about lugaw in general, you can get so creative with the different types of lugaw you can make. So this is just her comment and her saying that kind of gives me ideas in terms of what we can make in the studio. And not necessarily using the same base, but just getting creative with lugaw. So what I want to challenge myself in the studio with today is, can we make lugaw with different bases, but still retaining that essence of what a lugaw is, which is just a beautiful, kind of gluey, hot rice porridge that means so much to Filipinos. And that is so comforting at the end of the day. So good. Still, honestly, one of the best lugaws, Arroz Caldos, Cotos in the metro. This is brought to you by the Samsung Galaxy Tab S9 Ultra. This has been such an amazing tool that I use now on a daily basis. Because of its huge 14.56-inch AMOLED 2X screen with incredible brightness, vibrancy, and color, enhanced outdoor viewing with vision booster, I can use this for entertainment, but also for a lightweight solution for work on the go. I tend to bring it around and shoot so that while I'm not shooting or directing, I can do some extra work for the studio. The magnetic cover doubles up as a stand, and you can also opt to have an extra keyboard with it as well. Once you switch into DeX mode, this no longer just feels like a tablet, but basically starts feeling more like a computer. The display looks more like a Windows PC and you get a similar framework. The S Pen is also reactive and feels extremely natural to use. Aside from that, since it's packed with the unrivaled Snapdragon 8 Gen 2, it can run basically any app or software. I use it as a director's monitor. This comes in clutch when we need to shoot beauty shots or when I need to look at different monitor angles, both outside and in the studio. When cooking, I can use all the functionalities of my cell phone paired with a tab while simultaneously using it as a monitor and also for double checking recipes and watching reference videos to make sure we're not making any mistakes. And even if you are in a messy kitchen environment, you don't have to worry as this is incredibly durable and water resistant. Yes, I just spilled some water on my tablet to make a point, but don't worry, this can handle it. Okay, we're back in the studio and ready to cook some lugaw or arroz caldo. How great is it that I can actually see myself on this monitor? It just makes shooting, especially when you're hosting, so much easier, and it's so bright and beautiful. This is kind of like my new favorite gadget, honestly. Okay, so I've made this recipe a few times, and this is really just gonna be a really basic one. I'm gonna do a traditional, whatever you wanna call it, arroz caldo. Like, honestly, there's no tradition. The tradition is the one that your grandmother made for you or your mom made for you growing up. So this is how I grew up eating. The one thing that I personally like to do Here are all my ingredients. For this first one, I'm gonna do half glutinous rice, half jasmine rice. We're doing 1 portions here. And in terms of ratio, it's really up to you how ricey you want it to be, or how much protein you want it to be, or how soupy you want it to be. There's no kind of clear defined texture. I know some people who want theirs closer to like a risotto. My first key thing is the ginger. I like my ginger really thinly sliced. That way, if you do bite into it, it's not really uncomfortable. And we'll make sure to really cook this down so that if you do bite into it, it's easy to eat as well. Then we have some garlic. And then to complete this, what I like to call the Filipino Trinity, just some white onions or some red onions. So you could technically put this all in the pot and call it a day, but I like to sear my chicken first and then add in my veg after, just to give it a bit more depth and flavor. So this is a quick version of an Arroz Caldo. So I'm just gonna be using some boneless chicken thighs. You can also use some with bone. If you're not, usually my tip is if you're not gonna be using nice chicken stock to kind of give flavor to the soup or the broth that's gonna be in there, then you're probably better off using chicken with bone so that when you're cooking it with water, you get some of that more chickeny flavor. But if you're using stock like we are or broth like we are today, then you don't need bones actually. So you get every spoonful of rice, you get a nice chunk of chicken as well without having to take out that bone. Fish this out. So now you have a lot of flavor at the bottom of that pan. And this is the perfect oil to cook our ginger in. So like I said, I almost like to close to burn my ginger, just so that all that fragrance really comes out, and also you kind of get like little caramelized bites to it, which is always fantastic. You can always add a little bit more oil if you need to as well. Perfect color. Toss in your garlic and your onions. It should stop the cook of the ginger really quick. We're not looking for too much color here. Then you go back in with your chicken thighs. Make sure to get all those juices back in there. And just that smell already, for me, is intoxicating and kind of just brings back so many memories. At this point is when we're gonna add our rice. So we've got some glutinous rice and some jasmine rice. Make sure it's perfectly coated. Depending on your stock, always taste your stock before using it, because some stock or some broth, especially if you're buying it, is heavily seasoned already. So taste it first before using it. If it feels like it's too savory, too much saltiness in there, then cut it with some water. But if you're still not sure, what you do is you first cook it without adding any of your kind of like salt. Yeah, we used a little bit of salt with our chicken, but at this point I'm not gonna add any more salt. I'm just gonna wait for this to kind of cook down, and then I'm gonna season it with some fish sauce just to get it the flavor that I want. So now we're just gonna let that simmer away until kind of the rice cooks through. Next, this is kind of like the more expensive version, but it just shows you how you can have fun with our dishes in the Philippines and kind of like the formats that we have. So I wanted to make kind of like a crab arroz caldo just because it sounds so delicious in my head, and I'm sure it'd be really great. Obviously there are crab risotto, so this is kind of like a variation of that. So the first thing we want to do is make a really quick crab stock. So usually you would use kind of like lots of discarded shells, or you can use a whole crab to do this. But we're gonna do ours just really quickly in the time it takes to cook the crab claws that we'll be using, which is usually about 8 to 10 minutes, depending on the side of the crab. So I've got some boiling water. I'm gonna add some canned diced tomatoes. You can use some canned whole tomatoes as well. This will just give us a really cool color and flavor. To that, we're gonna add a little bit of salt, a barely chopped onion, and we can go ahead and place in our crab claws. So like I said, this is just gonna boil away for about 8 to 10 minutes. Next, we can actually make the base of the crab arroz caldo itself. So this time we will give a bit of color to our onions just to bring out that natural sweetness. I'm adding a lot of onions, so 1 whole white onion here. Everything we're doing today is about, I would say, good for 2 to 3 people. And when you're making arroz caldo, the number one thing you have to remember is just don't use that much rice, because as you cook it down, the rice expands. So you really don't need that much rice, honestly. Give that some color, and then we're gonna add in our garlic, a bit of salt just to help kind of just sweat everything out. Next, we have some taba talangka, so some crab fat. That's a prepared crab paste already. It's gonna give us some beautiful flavor, but also just a nice color. And then we're gonna grab some parboiled, already kind of shredded crab meat. It's so convenient to be able to buy this so that you don't have to actually go through crabs by yourself. Mix that in and toast that all up together. After a few minutes, we can go ahead and add our rice. So this time, to make it slightly different again, I'm using some sushi rice, which is nice and plump, and then some glutinous rice as well. I'm gonna toast up the rice nicely in here, and now we just have to wait for our stock. When cooking with crab claws, just wait for the crab claws to kind of float. Usually when they float, it means that they're cooked already, so my stock looks like it's ready to go. We are almost done, so while we're waiting for the crab, while we're waiting for the chicken, now I'm gonna do like a localized version of an Arroz Caldo or a Lugaw. Just using ingredients from a certain part of the Philippines, which I think is a really cool way of kind of adapting recipes in general. So we're gonna be doing kind of like a Benguet meets Ifugao meets mountain province kind of recipe. So we're gonna be calling this the mountain Arroz Caldo. So to make this slightly different, we have some pinuneg from Baguio Benguet. We have some purple rice, which this amazing lady gave to me in Mayoyao, Ifugao. And then we're gonna be mixing that with some of our glutinous rice as well. She did mention that this purple rice is sticky rice as well. So, and a note to everyone kind of watching this, all the rice obviously has been washed beforehand, right? And we're gonna be topping that off with some century eggs, some pork floss, so just a really kind of like porky Arroz Caldo, which should be fun to make. Since there's a lot of flavors happening here, exact same thing, we're just gonna be using some garlic and some onions for this one. And then the pinuneg, instead of like cooking it whole like this, I'm gonna be chopping it up and then sweating that out with the onions and the garlic. I'm gonna be using the same chicken broth here, but if you want it extra porky, then you can kind of use kind of like a really deep, almost ramen-like pork broth. I think it would be amazing. And look at that color. It's immediately like this dark purple. I'm actually not too sure how this is going to turn out. Crème fraîche, ikura, and our crab Arroz Caldo, but I'm all for experimentation. I think if you have an excess of crabs and you're a roadside seller and you want to kind of set yourself apart, start serving crab Arroz Caldo in your little eatery. You will have a line of people. That is delicious. Well, they can't find crème fraîche in the province, so maybe without the crème fraîche and the ikura, but definitely with the crab. So this takes elements from my childhood lugaw. It obviously wasn't served to me like this, but my mom actually did like putting all these condiments around it that I could eat my lugaw with, which was really great. I like kind of topping it like this because it just looks like a really beautiful plated dish. And it's comforting, yet it's also really beautiful. So if you are inviting people at the house and you're kind of serving it this way, it just looks a bit more striking. And this is kind of like a make your own adventure kind of thing. That flavor is intense. Oh my God, I love this so much. Like, this has to be one of my favorite Filipino dishes. Look at that, perfect bite, some chicken, some rice, some of that gluey soup, spring onions, some crunchy sweet onions, and some crunchy garlic. Like, you could add some maybe chili garlic on top. That would just kind of take it to a whole nother level. Man, there's nothing better than a classic done right. This is the most kind of congee-like presentation that we have with the pork floss, the century egg, but it's still very much Filipino because we've added the pinuneg, which kind of gives it this dinuguan meets champorado vibe, which is great. The purple rice here we got from Lugaw, and the lady who gave it to us, it was actually from her personal stash. So this is one of those heirloom rice varieties that they don't grow and plant commercially because it's still hand-picked. And she was like, you know, I really like you. Thank you for featuring us. And she gave me a whole kilo, which was super cool. So let's taste it all together. I think pork floss is one of those really great ingredients that you can add everywhere. Mmm. That's good. Wow, that like, look at that. There's a small piece of Pinot neck that you can see. Depth of flavor that you have in there, insane. Wow, I could keep eating this.